We're moving past the flash, past the violence, and, the folklore of these criminal empires.
Hmm.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are locking the doors, turning down the lights, and getting purely forensic with the ledger.
Exactly. We're moving beyond all the drama that makes the headlines, right?
Right, the turf wars, the big stories.
All of that. We're here to look at the cold, impartial mathematics of illicit enterprise.
Hmm.
This is episode 4. Trap economics, and our focus is, well, it's on quantification.
Our mission statement for this deep dive is, a full quantification of the illegal economy. We are examining every single facet of the finance,
From the very beginning.
from the initial startup capital all the way to the dizzying peak earnings, and then ultimately to the inevitable seizure and loss that, well, it shortens every career in this business.
It always does.
I'm looking at this purely as the accountant. I want to analyze the key financial metrics,
Mm-hmm.
the margins, pricing power, the tiers of distribution, and, how these organizations actually calculate their return on what is just a tremendous amount of risk.
And I'm here as the realist to constantly remind everyone that those impressive numbers are, well, they're built on stacks of physical currency.
A huge liability.
A huge logistical liability, not some liquid asset you can just move around.
Mhm.
We are going to analyze the tangible stuff.
Yeah.
The physical burden of managing millions in small bills, the paranoia that comes with that, and the lifestyle inflation that's basically a flashing light for law enforcement.
Yeah.
You can run the numbers, you can calculate millions in profit, but the fundamental question is always, how do you manage the sheer weight of that money without just collapsing under the chaos it creates?
That is the perfect tension to start with. So let's begin at the absolute highest tier of profit potential.
Okay.
The price of entry and this concept of global arbitrage, specifically focusing on the cocaine pipeline. This is where the numbers become, utterly detached from any legitimate business model you might study.
And arbitrage, for our purposes here, it's really just exploiting a huge price difference between two markets.
Right.
Usually separated by geography or, some kind of regulatory wall.
And when you remove the costs of legal regulation, taxes, all the conventional supply chain headaches,
And replace them with what? Risk capital and violence?
the potential margins just explode. They absolutely explode because the foundational cost, the input cost, is so minimal.
Right.
Our sources highlight the cost of manufacturing pure Colombian cocaine. A single kilo manufactured in Colombia could cost a producer as low as, what, 2,000 American dollars?
$2,000. That's the raw input. That's the manufacturing baseline.
And the profit journey starts, instantaneously. The very moment that product is successfully made, it starts accumulating massive value,
Just based on where it is.
purely on its geographic location relative to the world's major consumption hubs.
So that exact same kilo, once you successfully smuggle it into the United States, which is, the major risk variable,
That's the big one.
it could be sold wholesale to a distributor for $35,000.
No, just run the arithmetic on that. That initial transaction, the wholesale flip alone, represents a gross profit margin of over 94% on the initial manufacturing cost.
A 94% margin. Think about that for a second.
Unbelievable.
In legitimate retail or tech, those margins are virtually unheard of, even for luxury goods.
Yeah.
That profit is achieved just by moving product across one border.
Yeah.
It shows that all the enforcement and regulatory costs you're saving by operating illegally, they just translate directly into pure capital gain.
And crucially, that's still the wholesale price in the U.S. That's the point where major traffickers are moving it in bulk, often in, hundreds of kilos at a time.
Yeah.
If that single kilo continues its journey, say, across the Atlantic to Madrid or another major European hub, the price jumps again. Dramatically, pushing as high as $60,000 or even $70,000.
Wow. So that exponential growth in price, it just demonstrates that the further you are from the source, the higher the price. Because the risk of interception and the cost of transport and, greasing palms, it's all compounded across multiple borders. The whole operation is financed by geographic scarcity, driving up that price.
We even see this principle applied in smaller regional arbitrage plays. It shows there's market inefficiency even within the U.S. itself.
Oh, absolutely.
We have the example of the New York dealer who was buying a key for $15,000 when he knew that same product was, and I quote, going for $22,000 out of town. So just outside the immediate metro area.
So that's a $7,000 immediate arbitrage.
Immediate.
He made that money not by smuggling across continents, but just by knowing the price difference between two neighboring markets.
And having a better, more trusted connection, the source says the connect had to go out of town to move the key faster, which suggests, maybe a localized glut in New York that this dealer was exploiting for $7,000 a pop.
If that dealer moved just 10 kilos a month on that little arbitrage,
Do the math.
that's an immediate $70,000 in untaxed revenue.
For making a phone call and arranging a short drive, it just reveals how sensitive the pricing is to local supply.
But the realist in me sees that localized trust network as a huge vulnerability.
How so?
Well, why was that dealer getting the low price? Because he was trusted.
Right.
That trust is both the source of his profit and the weak link. That when it's broken by law enforcement, the entire supply chain just comes crashing down.
That's a great point. Now let's transition to marijuana because its economic journey is way more complex.
And it's shifted so much over time.
Drastically. The arbitrage used to be less about quality or border risk and more about just sheer availability, especially in the early days.
You have to look at how the market evolved. Back in the 1970s, particularly in Miami.
Yeah.
The sources describe a time when Colombian and Jamaican suppliers were moving product by the ton. Literally barge loads arriving every week.
So there was just so much of it.
An overwhelming supply. An ounce, what they call a 5-finger lid, sold for only $10.
$10. That is an incredible indicator of a complete supply glut. Compare that to today, where an eighth of an ounce can easily cost $50. The sheer volume was their problem back then.
The sources mentioned warehouses full of weed in Miami that they couldn't even sell.
It would just spoil.
It would just spoil. And that represents a significant, unexpected loss of inventory and capital.
All due to bad market absorption and, the fact that it's a perishable good.
That loss of capital to spoilage, it shows a really early form of economic inefficiency. It was driven by, unsophisticated logistics. They weren't managing inventory. They were just dumping it on the market.
That supply glut is long gone now. It's been replaced by a market driven by high-grade product and sophisticated high-risk smuggling, even domestically.
Right. We see the modern arbitrage where, high-grade West Coast product is the prized commodity.
Absolutely. If you're a wholesaler in this modern era, you might be buying pounds for, say, $2,000 to $2,200 wholesale in California or Oregon, where supply is abundant.
Okay.
But as soon as you successfully transport it east, and that's the magnified risk variable, the price just skyrockets.
But I need to quantify that risk variable. What are the costs and potential losses that are factored into that price jump? It's not just gas money.
No, of course not.
It includes payment for your crew, risk mitigation like decoy cars and technology, and, an implicit loss calculation.
Right.
If a trafficker assumes, say, a 1 in 10 chance of losing a shipment to a state trooper, that 10% loss has to be factored back into the price of the other 90% of the product that gets through.
And if they succeed, the flipping is massive and immediate. You're flipping those same pounds to regional dealers in the Midwest or East Coast for $2,500, $3,000, even $3,800 a pound.
So that's an instant gross profit of up to, $1,600 per unit?
Per unit, generated purely by transportation risk and access to a restricted market.
And we see the ultimate margin on that domestic arbitrage in some extreme cases.
Yeah.
Like the example of the dealer who took pounds, bought for $2,000 and sold them for $4,000 apiece, easily, back home in Montana.
That is a 100% markup on the wholesale price.
Doubling your investment.
Doubling the initial investment just by driving 1,000 miles or so to exploit that severe scarcity. The source material is unequivocal on this. The biggest, fastest money in the marijuana trade was not in growing it.
No.
It was in logistics, the transport, getting the pounds out of state to places where they would fetch the highest prices.
It creates this kind of supply chain paradox, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, the more successful you are at transport, the richer you get.
Yeah.
But the higher the prices you charge, the more enticing your operation looks to rivals and to law enforcement.
Right?
The scarcity that's created by distance and legal barriers, that generates those shocking numbers. But that same distance is what invites interception.
Okay, that brings us perfectly to the next level of financial management scaling operations.
Right.
Arbitrage is fantastic for single transactions and, rapid capital accumulation. But to become a true kingpin, you need immense volume.
Volume changes everything.
It drastically reduces your unit cost and increases your annualized revenue, and it demands some serious operational sophistication.
The ability to scale is what separates the corner hustler from the multinational corporation.
Yeah.
Scaling changes the economics completely because you move from retail margins to like manufacturing and logistics margins.
Let's analyze the volume discount in the marijuana trade, using the Detroit Kingpin as a primary example. This individual was able to move massive weight, a ton, which is 2,000 pounds or more.
Wow.
While their early purchase price might have been $500 a pound, once they achieved this immense scale, shipping a ton, after calculating all expenses,
Everything.
payment to the crew, security checkpoint fees, they drove their unit cost down to an astonishing $100 to $125 a pound.
That is the core economic insight right there.
It is.
They lowered the cost per unit by 75 to 80% just by increasing volume and streamlining their supply chain. This immense logistical feat means the cost of risk, the overhead, the payoffs, it's all distributed across 2,000 pounds instead of 50.
So suddenly, that $2,000 street price in Montana looks like a 2,000% profit margin on the source costs.
It's vertical integration and economy of scale at its most ruthless.
We get another perspective from the Tucson smuggler. They weren't quite achieving that $100 price point, but after paying for the product, the crew, and the checkpoint fees, the price per pound was approximately $530 when it reached Ohio.
But they were still hugely profitable because of the volume, right?
Absolutely. They were selling it wholesale for $800 to $900 a pound, so they were making a lower percentage margin than the Montana dealer, maybe 30 or 40%.
But the scale.
The source mentions sending 400 pounds at a time, bringing in about $80,000 a run. If you do that twice a month, you're netting substantial, steady annualized revenue that just eclipses the small-time arbiter.
And that volume, that scale, it immediately requires a parallel velocity on the retail side.
Which brings us to the astonishing high-velocity operations, specifically the crack spots in Harlem.
Now we're moving from the logistics of bulk transport to the operational discipline of high-speed retail.
The numbers here are just mind-boggling. Pure daily revenue velocity. We are talking about Harlem crack spots running $10,000 to $20,000 a day in sales.
$10,000 to $20,000 a day.
If you assume a $10 average transaction, that is 1,000 to 2,000 transactions every single day, often running 247, that's astonishing turnover for a local neighborhood business.
That level of transactional volume requires an industrial-grade organization. It's not just selling drugs. It's managing lines, inventory, rotation of personnel, and critically, the physical cash flow.
Right.
The management of those spots required a level of sophistication we usually don't associate with street dealing.
This is where we analyze the infamous customer service model. The source mentions the organization keeping a bag of ones, single-dollar bills, specifically for the pitcher, the frontline seller.
Go why?
To manage the small bills issue, yes, but also to provide this essential microfinancing goodwill. If a customer was $1 short on a $10 bottle, the dealer would instantly cover it.
No sweat, I'll make it up.
Exactly.
That momentary gesture is so critical. In a high-velocity, high-stress, low-trust environment, consistency and reliability are everything.
They are.
By covering the dollar, the dealer is ensuring the customer doesn't just go to the rival spot next door. He's solidifying market share. It's a loss leader that secures future revenue, treating the customer's habit as a guaranteed annuity.
It's operational discipline applied to retail, reducing friction points for the consumer. But the realist has to weigh in here. Imagine the physical task of turning over $10,000 to $20,000 in dollar bills, fives, and tens every single day.
It's a mountain of cash.
Yeah.
And it physically smells bad. It's incredibly hard to count accurately, and it is impossible to deposit legitimately. The source talks about the smell of the crack money. It just permeates everything.
So the cash itself becomes the biggest threat.
Securing it, counting it, transporting it, the cash flow itself becomes the greatest operational threat, not the rival dealers.
Okay, let's move back to the mail order model, which emphasizes efficiency over that street velocity. We can quantify exactly what $1 million operation looked like in the pre-legalization marijuana market.
Yeah, this is a business built on speed and discretion.
And it demonstrates a key accountant principle: minimizing retail-level risk by moving directly to the wholesale transaction.
Absolutely. The model involved moving, 15 to 25 pounds of weed a week?
Right, with the goal of generating approximately $1,000 profit per pound through that East Coast Midwest arbitrage we talked about. This volume translated into a solid $1 million per year business.
And the mail was described as the fastest and most efficient way to move bulk product.
Specifically designed to mitigate the risks that come with, driving it across the country.
The logistics of that operation are really telling. They were shipping 3 boxes a week, 5 to 10 pounds per box, the different addresses across multiple states.
Compartmentalizing risk.
That distribution pattern is designed to do exactly that. If one box gets intercepted, the other 2 shipments survive. They were managing risk exposure not through speed, but through distribution across the postal system.
And the profit potential at the extreme high end of this business is, well, it's staggering. Let's look at the Hawaiian pod operation described in the sources.
This was a sophisticated, high-end, vertically integrated model.
It was. The operation was moving 25 pounds of high-grade product a week, and the calculation cited a weekly profit of $425,000 a week.
That annualizes to over $20 million. That's a substantial corporation by any standard. To justify that number, we need to understand the calculation of the wholesale transaction.
The wholesale price they were getting for the high-grade Hawaiian product was $3,200 a pound in the distribution hub. So for 25 pounds, the total gross revenue was around $80,000. Wait.
Yeah, that doesn't align with the $425,000 weekly profit figure that was cited.
You're right, it doesn't.
This is where we have to read the sources really carefully and connect the dots. The $425,000 must be the trafficker's take, after all the complex splits and money laundering of a much, much larger cash flow.
Okay, that makes sense.
The source clarifies that in the original large-scale operation, the total money moves was enormous. It states that half the money, $425,000, stayed in Hawaii to cover growing logistics internal splits.
And the other half came to the trafficker.
After expenses and a split with their own organization. The $425,000 represents the trafficker's personal annualized net profit from that massive flow of capital. It indicates the scale was exponentially larger than just 25 pounds a week.
That makes a lot more sense. That figure represents the retained operating profit after multiple tiers have taken their cut. And how did that incredible sum, hundreds of thousands of dollars a week, travel?
Well, this is the perfect pivot to the physical burden and loss of cash flow.
It is.
This is where the sheer logistics of illicit finance just hit home. To move that capital across the country without a trace, they had to resort to, really primitive physical tactics.
He's hollowing out VCRs.
Exactly. They would stack the cash tightly inside the electronic shell and mail them.
As the realist, you need to analyze this specific tactic for us. Why VCRs?
Well, they were large, dense consumer electronics. They contained heavy components, which made the weight of the concealed cash less conspicuous.
Plausible deniability.
They were also common and easy to get, offering plausible deniability if a package was questioned. The source describes pulling up to a porch and seeing over $1 million arrive in a car at one time, all stacked inside those VCRs.
Wow.
That just reveals the sheer physical, logistical genius required just to move the profits, not even the product itself.
So, as the accountant, I track profits in the millions. As the realist, you see a massive logistical liability that is constantly under threat.
Precisely. We go back to the problem of volume and weight. We established that $1 million in $100 bills is a relatively compact package.
Right, a small briefcase.
But if you're managing the daily revenue from those high-velocity crack spots, where it's all 5s, 10s, and 20s, $1 million requires multiple huge duffel bags.
And it's heavy.
It's tremendously heavy. This is the operational incentive for high-level traffickers to insist on high-denomination bills whenever they can. It dramatically reduces the physical burden and the risk of transport and storage.
And the risk of just sitting on that physical currency is enormous because it's totally uninsured. It's exposed to seizure, to decay, to anything.
One source mentioned losing a shipment of $40,000 that was being driven off to a landfill as they spoke.
And think about the economic normalization of that risk. They had so much cash that a $40,000 loss was just deemed part of the game.
Yeah, and preferable to the risk of having it seized by the authorities.
It was part of the game because the paranoia surrounding seizure was so pervasive.
The source states he actually believed that burying money in a treasure chest might have been safer than having it seized. That just speaks volumes about the fear of forfeiture, which is a state tactic designed specifically to destabilize these organizations financially.
The sources detail some catastrophic financial losses from intercepted cash shipments.
Mm.
One trafficker lost 2 separate cash shipments that were intercepted, one totaling $3 million and the second $1.8 million. That is nearly $5 million in raw seized capital that never even made it back.
And that loss is not just a write-off. It's a shock to the system. In a legitimate business, a loss of $4.8 million in working capital would trigger bankruptcy.
For sure.
In the illicit world, it triggers internal paranoia, a scramble for liquidity, and it can potentially lead to violence over who's to blame. And in this scenario, the DEA never even intercepted the marijuana.
They only got the money.
Only the money.
The money trail is the liability. We even have the anecdote of the trafficker keeping $100,000 in a safe next to his bed.
The getaway money.
The getaway money, because it helped me sleep good. And that was immediately seized upon arrest. That cash, meant to provide security and peace of mind, instantly becomes the physical evidence of the crime.
And that leads directly to the need for these primitive cash management and laundering attempts, even before the big bank schemes. We talked about the VCR tactic, moving over $1 million at a time through the mail.
Then you have the slightly more sophisticated attempt, like the sneaker laundering method.
Okay, how did that work?
This involves selling high volumes of a legitimate product, like, say, $20,000 worth of sneakers a month, and paying taxes on that revenue.
So it creates a legitimate-looking stream of income, makes you look like a successful tax-paying retailer.
Exactly.
But the realist implication here is crucial. The flaw is that the initial money used to buy the inventory, the startup capital to acquire $20,000 worth of legitimate product, can still be tied back to the act of crime if the authorities look hard enough.
Right.
The traffickers knew he wouldn't have an answer for where he got the initial money to buy the inventory, especially since he was still actively committing the crime that generated the capital.
It's a temporary fix at best. The government doesn't just trace the sale, they trace the initial acquisition of capital.
The system is designed to trace capital, not just the physical product.
If the source of funds is illegal, the entire legitimate business you build on top of it is vulnerable to seizure and forfeiture.
That's the accountant's nightmare and the realist's confirmation. The only successful laundering happens when the underlying criminal enterprise has fully stopped.
And the wealth is just being transitioned.
Right, into the legitimate economy.
Yeah.
While the criminal operation is active, that money trail is always live.
That sets the stage perfectly for our next section: economic competition and cartel revenue streams.
Okay.
When you have organizations dealing in billions, diversification isn't just a strategic option, it's a strategic imperative for long-term survival. Drug money alone is not enough.
Not to maintain control, pay off governments, and absorb those catastrophic losses.
Precisely. The most powerful Mexican criminal organizations have fully diversified their revenue portfolio.
Which means that policy efforts, like drug legalization, which were once seen as a crippling blow to cartels,
They're just not enough anymore.
they are insufficient to destabilize them. They've shifted their commodity focus.
And the prime example is human smuggling. This is no longer a side hustle, it's a massive, reliable revenue stream built on international demand.
For instance, Chinese nationals are paying cartels an astonishing $35,000 per head for illegal entry into the United States.
And this includes complex logistics, organized flights, hotels, smuggling, facilitated through apps like WhatsApp. They are operating a sophisticated international travel agency for illicit entry.
The scale is immense and the margins are high because the the demand for migration is constant.
Cartels were estimated to be making up to $14 billion just on migrant smuggling alone.
That kind of revenue source guarantees power and resilience. If the cocaine market shrinks by 10%, they absorb it easily by increasing volume in human trafficking.
Beyond diversification, there's the concept of economic warfare.
A financial tactic to suppress competition and achieve a monopoly.
It's raw capitalism applied ruthlessly, using superior capital reserves to depress prices and just starve out your rivals.
We see this principle in action with Chongo, the former crack kingpin. His strategy during intense street competition was to engage in a calculated pricing war.
He would flood the market. He'd sell $3 vials when all his competitors were selling theirs for $5.
And he'd offer promotions, like buy one, get one free.
As the accountant, I see this as a temporary, calculated loss leader.
And as the realist, I see the immediate violent implication. This strategy is designed to starve out the competition. A rival dealer who operates day-to-day without deep capital reserves cannot sustain a 40% price cut.
So they have two choices.
They're forced to either fold or initiate violence to stop the price depression.
And Chongo could sustain that calculated loss because his scale and his capital reserves were immense. He'd run the pricing war until the competing groups ran out of cash, allowing him to seize their territory and establish absolute pricing power.
And then eventually return the price back to $5 or even higher.
achieving a complete return on investment through monopoly control.
This monopolistic control is also visible at the cartel level. The Los Chapitos faction of the Sinaloa cartel achieved absolute financial and physical monopoly in Culiacan.
They monopolize all drug markets in that city: pot, coke, heroin, ecstasy.
By controlling the entire supply chain, from manufacturing to retail, they ensure absolute pricing power within that major urban center. They essentially become the primary source of economic stability,
Functioning as the law in the city.
with an estimated 50 to 100,000 people on the cartel payroll.
That payroll is the key economic stabilizer. They aren't just organized criminals, they're the biggest regional employer.
The populace becomes financially dependent on the stability of the cartel, which ensures both loyalty and a flow of intelligence. When you control the jobs, the supply chain, and the price of every commodity in the city, you've achieved a level of economic sovereignty that, well, transcends mere criminality.
That brings up the inevitable counterpoint to all this success. The cost of success, or as the realist calls it, exposure and lifestyle inflation.
This is the operational paradox. The money you made is what seals your fate. That money demands to be spent, and when you spend it lavishly, you create an inescapable marker for law enforcement, particularly the specialized financial investigators at the IRS and DEA.
The visible indicators of wealth are like a beacon, just pointing directly to the source of the illicit capital. We hear about the need to keep up appearances with Colombian connects by spending $1,500 to $2,000 per suit.
Right. You're trying to project legitimacy and success, but that high-end wardrobe immediately differentiates you from the street level.
And puts you on the radar of federal agencies.
And the automobile flaunt is the classic example of lifestyle inflation. Purchasing high-end vehicles like that green Lexus model made famous in Jay-Z videos, it instantly signaled success.
The car is a badge of honor.
But every time you drive that vehicle, you increase your visibility and the risk of being noticed by the wrong agencies, who specialize in tracking conspicuous wealth. Chris George, the oxycodone kingpin, had his employees driving Ferraris, a direct signal of high-volume illicit cash flow that is impossible to hide.
And the idea of seeking normalcy also creates severe risk. We have that poignant anecdote of a trafficker trying to move his family to Parkchester.
Considered the high-end, desirable area of the Bronx in the early 80s.
He was trying to elevate his life, to buy stability and escape the chaos of the streets.
But the underlying structure of his illegal business was inescapable. He moved to Parkchester, a supposedly safer area, only to find the crime had followed him.
His car was continually being stolen.
This failure to legitimize his life forced another move, this time to New Jersey. The source describes this as the failure to escape the trap, where even your attempts to buy stability fail because the criminal foundation just pulls everything back into chaos.
So, what does this all mean for the longevity of a criminal career? We have to debate the inherent corruption of the wealth itself.
Right.
Does disciplined financial management extend a career? Or is the money itself the corrupting and ultimately fatal element that shortens it?
I argue the money itself is the weapon the state uses against you. Look at the high-profile downfalls. The former San Francisco drug lord, facing life sentences, was convicted not because he was caught with product.
But because of the bureaucratic machinery tracing his finances.
Exactly. The charge wasn't immediate possession. It was tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy.
The evidence used wasn't just testimony. Crucially, they found ledgers detailing 580 kilos of product in a co-conspirator's purse.
The paper trail.
The paper trail, the meticulous record-keeping that was so essential for the accountant to track profit and loss, became the undeniable proof of the conspiracy.
The paper trail was the downfall, resulting in a sentencing based on that massive volume. We also have the example of the former oxycodone kingpin. He got a 60-month federal prison sentence.
Despite never being caught with a single pill.
Not one. The entire conviction was built on conspiracy and financial crimes, tied to the massive volume they moved. It demonstrates that the federal government is far more effective prosecuting the economics of the trap than the street-level drug possession.
The lesson for the learner is clear. You can evade the street cops and the ATF, but you can't evade the alphabet agencies, the DEA, IRS, and FBI, who track the flow of cash that creates these large-scale conspiracies.
Right.
The necessity of scale and record-keeping that's inherent in the accountant's domain creates the realist's liability.
The movement of cash creates forensic evidence that lasts forever. That $4.8 million seizure may have been a loss, but the investigation into how that money was being shipped led directly to the organizations that facilitated it. The money is the enduring evidence.
Now let's turn our attention to the final economy we have to quantify. Hyperinflated, highly specialized black markets that exist inside the prison system.
Economics behind bars. If you thought the 94% margins on cocaine arbitrage were high, wait until you see the inflation driven by extreme scarcity and risk inside a maximum security prison. The prices are astronomically detached from any street value.
Let's quantify two hard figures that really illustrate this scarcity multiplier. For meth,
Okay.
a single line, which is an amount equivalent to a whole gram on the street, costs $20 inside.
A whole gram on the street might be $40 to $60. But inside, just a fraction of that is $20.
And for hard drugs, the markup is horrifyingly steep. A prison gram of black tar heroin, described as the size of a peanut or an M&M, so far less than an actual gram,
Costs $600.
$600. This illustrates an astronomical, unsustainable markup. When one is able to sell more heroin and crystal meth in a place like Big Sandy than they ever did on the streets of Austin, you understand the magnitude of the captive market created by scarcity.
And this economy isn't random. It's highly structured around specific commodities and controlled by specific groups.
We see clear commodity control. Black gangs controlled the weed market, often smuggled in via balloons during visiting room sessions.
A logistical supply chain that requires immense coordination and risk.
And the white NSA gangs, like the Mexican Mafia or the Aryan Brotherhood, they dominated the meth supply.
This clear segmentation minimizes turf wars over specific goods and solidifies the internal economic power structure. The unique logistics, who has access to the visiting room, who can source high-grade crystal meth, that dictates who controls the internal wealth.
The sources also touch upon the highly specific financial instruments used inside the walls, compensating for the lack of actual currency.
Right, things like stamps or commissary goods become the exchange medium.
Stamps, for instance, act as a perfect commodity, small, universally accepted for communication, and easily divisible.
And this leads to a sophisticated internal banking and predatory lending system. We have the concept of two-for-one lending. If you borrow a certain amount of currency or commodity, you owe double back.
If you borrow money to buy a pack of cigarettes today, you owe to tomorrow.
That debt mechanism is how internal power structures are maintained and enforced, often through extreme violence.
Furthermore, the prison system has adopted external technology. Sources detail how high-volume illicit transactions are now facilitated by street-to-street Cash App transfers.
Someone on the outside sends money to an account on the outside, based on a debt incurred inside the walls.
It's a decentralized digital bank with the physical enforcement handled internally.
It's a complete economic system mirroring the outside world, but with compressed supply chains and amplified stakes. The desperation drives the hyperinflation, turning a tiny amount of black tar heroin into a $600 purchase. And this market is so efficient that people who came in never having been involved in the street drug trade end up becoming highly proficient in sewing up heroin and crystal meth inside federal prison.
Because that's where the power and money are found.
Exactly.
As we synthesize the vast array of data we've covered, let's just recap the mathematics and the reality of this economy.
The immense profits are built entirely on arbitrage and volume, but the longevity of the enterprise is killed by the logistical chaos of managing that cash.
Correct. We started with the cocaine pipeline, manufacturing a kilo for as low as $2,000 and selling it wholesale for $35,000 in the U.S., or pushing it up to $70,000 in Europe.
That 94% margin is the economic engine that funds the entire infrastructure.
We then looked at the high-volume mail-order pot game, generating an astonishing $425,000 in weekly profit for a single top-tier trafficker, demonstrating the power of supply chain efficiency.
But those staggering numbers are built on stacks of physical currency. We detail the cost of that burden. Losing $3 to $5 million in a single intercepted cash shipment, a routine loss, and the absurd necessity of keeping capital hidden in VCRs to mail it across the country.
Highlighting the primitive methods required to move large illicit sums. The key financial principle is vertical scaling and controlling unit cost. Whether it's dropping the per-pound cost of marijuana from $500 to $125 by moving tons,
or running a high-velocity crack spot, generating $10,000 to $20,000 a day in pure revenue.
volume validates the risk and generates the capital needed for economic warfare, like the $3 vial price depression strategy.
But the money is the unavoidable trap. The wealth necessitates a lifestyle inflation. The $1,500 suits, the high-end cars, the Parkchester move. that acts as an inescapable signal to federal law enforcement.
The money demands laundering, and laundering creates a paper trail, which leads to conspiracy charges, tax evasion, and long federal sentences.
The accountant's meticulous drug ledger detailing 580 kilos becomes the realist's fatal flaw, resulting in decades behind bars, often without ever being caught with a single physical product in hand.
And the diversification of cartels into human smuggling, making $14 billion a year, is a strategic shift designed to mitigate drug regulation risk by stabilizing their economic base.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, the threat to these organizations is no longer just a rival gang showing up with a shotgun. The real existential threat is the bureaucratic machinery of the state, tracing the cash flow.
It's the IRS and the DEA using financial evidence, the movement and acquisition of capital, to build RICO and conspiracy cases that are nearly impossible to defend against.
So this raises an important and provocative question for you, the learner. When illicit cash flow is so physically heavy that it requires VCRs to mail, and the profits are so large that a 94% margin is standard.
Does the very pursuit of that staggering wealth, which necessitates immense scale and meticulous record-keeping, inevitably generate a paper trail so complex and large that failure, in the form of federal indictment based purely on financial conspiracy, is the only sustainable long-term outcome?
The magnitude of the money becomes the fatal flaw that consumes the entire enterprise.